Today's discussion is the next part of our Gender and Terrorism series, exploring the role of gender in terrorist activity and political violence. Today, we talk to Dr. Anne Speckhard. Dr. Anne Speckhard is Director of the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism and an Adjunct Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the Georgetown School for Medicine. Dr. Speckhard, thank you for taking the time today.
You're welcome, Eleni. Happy to be with your viewers.
Thank you. As author of 7 books, including Bride of ISIS and Talking to Terrorists, what can you tell us about how you approach the question of female agency in terrorist activity? I mean, what draws women to jihadism?
Okay, that's a huge question. First of all, I'd say all of our research and my research over the last 25 years has been mainly based on interview data. So I've gone directly to the terrorists and talked to over 700 of them. And in the case of ISIS, 263 ISIS prisoners, returnees, and defectors, to ask them in about a 2-hour interview, life history, where they were from, who they were before they even heard of ISIS, how they heard of ISIS, what attracted them to ISIS, what were the influences that were pushing them and pulling them, were they recruited over the internet by a friend in a mosque, in a neighborhood, did they travel alone or did they travel with a family member, if they traveled at all, because some people join ISIS and attack at home or assisting ISIS at home. In this case, nearly everyone had traveled to ISIS territory and lived under the caliphate. What were their experiences, both positive and negative? And also asking them what changed over time in terms of their radicalization and how they became disillusioned, if they did, if they disengaged from the group, and if they de-radicalized. And in that regard, we found something called spontaneous de-radicalization, where people lessen in their level of radicalization, even without a specific program being applied to them. So as far as gender, we've looked at men and women. In our ISIS sample, I believe it's 39 of the 263 are females, but we ask about experiences of everyone involved. So a woman will tell about her husband and her children. A husband will tell about his wife. So we definitely learn the gendered experiences of both. And when females went to ISIS, they were generally welcomed into a madafa. They were separated from their male counterparts. The males were sent for Sharia training and for weapons training. The women were asked if they'd like to join the ISIS morality police, the Hizbah, or if they'd like to be a propagandist. And they weren't allowed to live on their own. They waited till their husbands came back and picked them up. Or if they joined as a single woman, they waited until the marriage bureau set them up with someone to marry. Otherwise, they had to stay in these madafas. And they also were put back in madafa, oftentimes against their will, if they lost their husband, and then had to wait to basically be coerced to marry again. And I would say most women in ISIS were raising families, had small children, were doing domestic things, but they were definitely supporting the machinery of a killing machine. And some of them were highly radicalized.
As you've just told us, you've interviewed many people, and in fact, you've interviewed over 700 people involved in political violence. In your experience, how useful is the umbrella term terrorist? I mean, more specifically, in relation to women.
Being a woman and being a researcher, it really irks me to listen to security professionals, and I listened to this for a long time in the first years of studying ISIS, that these women had no agency, that they were completely tricked, that they followed their husbands, that they had no choice. And that simply isn't true. Women have agency in their lives, even in situations that are pretty dire. They do make choices, and they may choose the lesser of two evils. You know, if their husband's leaving them to ISIS and they're going to be impoverished by it, they may choose to follow their husband, but they do choose. And some women are the instigators. Some are the ones that want to go and join, or wanted to go and join ISIS, that wanted to build the caliphate, that wanted to live what they believed was this utopian dream. So as far as applying a label of terrorism to them, I would say you have to look at the group. If you join a group that engages in the classic definitions of terrorism, of killing other people for the purpose of terrorizing a large group and changing the political process, in the case of ISIS, to actually set up a state and to kill and engage in political violence, then you have joined a terrorist group and you are by definition also a terrorist. Whether the women joined or not is an interesting question, because it was a very sexist organization, or is a sexist organization. So the men only took Sharia training, which was the ideological training, and at the end gave their bayat, their pledge of allegiance, and women very rarely gave a bayat and very rarely took Sharia training. It was just assumed that in a patriarchal group like this, that your husband was in charge of you and would train you in the ideology of ISIS. So if you functioned as a wife and mother, but chose to go live there, are you a terrorist? And that's really something for courts to decide, and it depends on the laws of each country. You know, there's material support for terrorism, which could be offering your own body or bringing money in and helping the group. A lot of countries won't prosecute a woman just because she cooked, cleaned, and washed for her ISIS fighter husband.
Given that we use socio-political factors and psychological terms to describe violent behavior, would you say that the term rehabilitation is useful when it comes to dealing with terrorist actors, and particularly, of course, in this case, women? And then is rehabilitation possible?
Rehabilitation is absolutely possible. I was involved in and wrote the psychological aspects and oversaw the writing of the Islamic challenge aspects of the detainee rehabilitation program in Iraq, which was applied to 23,000 detainees, 800 juveniles. So I've seen it in action. I've been intimately involved. And now I've been involved with lots of European countries on preparing for repatriation, reintegration, rehabilitation. And I would say, in my opinion, the most important first step when you're bringing someone home from a group like ISIS is the legal process of can you prosecute this person? Can you hold anything over them that makes them want to take part in rehabilitation? Because a good rehabilitation program will be voluntary. You can't really, in a democracy, do thought control on other people. But you can say, listen, you were in a terrorist group, we're going to prosecute you for terrorism. In fact, we have prosecuted you, but we'll give you a stay of sentence if you take part in this rehabilitation program, which will address your thoughts. And it's up to you. So I would say the first step in rehabilitation is, can you get people to give their consent to voluntarily take part in a process that will address the ideology of the group and that will address the psychosocial reasons for joining, the psychosocial rewards of being in it, and the ideological rewards, and redirect them to better things. And of course, rehabilitation is possible. We know that people radicalize. That's a change in thoughts. That's ideological indoctrination. So of course they can de-radicalize. They can also change their thoughts to believing in more moderate, less violent expressions of religion, and not endorsing a terrorist group. And they can change their behaviors to be serving themselves as well as society. People joined ISIS and join any terrorist group or any extremist group because they believe it's going to meet their needs. That's the sole and most important thing to understand. People get into things because they have needs. And the group convinces them, hey, we've got everything for you. In the case of ISIS, it was this Islamic utopia. You got a geographical cure. Whatever your problems were, come here, they'll disappear. I mean, there's actually cases, a young woman that said that she ran across the Turkish-Syrian border. She felt her problems were falling off her shoulders and she was running into paradise. Of course, you know, she found a whole new set of problems, but people join to get their needs met, and good counseling, good programs can redirect needs to more useful ways of meeting them. Reintegration, we have to look at the level of integration that existed beforehand, the sociological factors that exist. I mean, we know France had a really hard time with their rehabilitation program. I think even declared it a failure and shut it down for a while. And I would say that was probably because the people going through it knew that when they got out, they're going to be facing the same difficult discrimination and marginalization as what were push factors for them to join in the beginning.
Dr. Speckhard, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. I hope that was helpful.